Now that we have the level factory script generating levels for us, we can move on to the player. The player is an in-game representation of the user. It bridges the gap between the digital and the physical. And because of this, a large amount of the feel of a game comes from how well the player responds and plays. Here in Chapter 2, we'll be creating the player and writing its necessary functions, such as input and movement. The first thing we're going to want our player to be able to do is take a keyboard command and do an action. In other words, when we press left or right, we want the player to run left or right. We have other actions we need to code too, such as jumping and climbing. Let's get into it. Before we touch the code though, the first thing we're going to do is create its prefab. Next, we need to modify the layer collision matrix in order to make the player jumping layer not collide with the platform layer. Now that we have the player prefab created, let's code the player's script. First up, we're going to need a way of knowing what the player is currently doing. This matters as the actions the player can do are different in each state. For example, you don't want the player to be able to jump when already mid-jump. Or, another example, walk left or right while climbing up a ladder. We store this state in a custom variable type called an enum. Here we have defined that custom type with 3 states, and then declared a variable of that type to use. With the state now available, we're able to run different input functions based off the state inside the update function. Now it's time to make the input functions. We'll make input moving first. It will require the following variables. Input moving calls our associated event functions when a key is pressed. Obviously, we have none of the functions that we're trying to call yet, so let's make them. First, we'll start with the movement function, run. Next is stop movement. Stop movement clears the movement vector Next is start climb. Start climb changes our state into the climbing state. And finally, we need jump. With the input moving function now operational, let's code our second state's input function, input climbing. First, we're going to need some new variables. Input climbing only has to deal with moving up and down, exiting the climb state, and some math calculations to work out exactly where the player is. Once the input moving function runs start climb, it will pass control over to the climb function to make it actually climb. And just like stop movement, we're going to need to stop climbing. We require access to some of the level data. However, the level builder script has it set to private, meaning the player's script can't access it. So we have two options. We can make the level data public, however this would expose our level data for easy hacking and manipulation. It's generally considered a bad programming practice. Instead, and our other option, is to create a public access function that will give us what we need. We'll be taking that option. We need to return to the level factory script. Navigate down to the bottom. It's here that we'll be adding the new function that will return the requested rung to another script. Our next public access function will give us a way of grabbing the count of the rungs. We also need a public access function to determine where the player currently is and what platform he's on. While we're still here in the level factory script, now that we have our player prefab, let's set it up so the player is spawned into the world when the game first starts. We're going to need to add these variables. Now append the following to the bottom of the previous created function, level create. With that out of the way, it's time to assign the new player prefab to its asset variable, and to delete the already spawned player in the hierarchy. Return back to the player script. So far we've coded the logic for our input, but we haven't actually coded the event of moving. This next part of our player script takes care of that. But first, we'll require the following variables. We have to initialize these variables at what's called runtime. Runtime is a term that means the data we wish to use isn't available until the project is running. Now we can add our movement function. And now finally, make sure to call move inside update, underneath your switch statement. Congratulations, you've just finished Chapter 2. If you've done everything correctly, you should now be able to save, compile, and play your game to see a full setup level, and have a player standing there ready for input. Press left or right to move the player, and press up and down to climb a ladder